bit.
Use your eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Hello, Humanists of Australia. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure more people will be rolling in as time passes, but we're going to get into this as we have, I'm sure, plenty to cover tonight. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a new member to Humanists Australia and joined as the live stream host. Tonight is a bit of a trial run, so we're able to work out any issues of which we've been having plenty of fun with so far. Also, it's for me to get used to hosting. That said, I thought, why not get myself cancelled on my first attempt to talk about masculinity, which, as you can see, I'm clearly an authority on, as well as everyone else, it seems. Everyone has their own expert opinions on this topic, and it's a hot topic, especially today. Anyway, I have David and Rod here with me today, who are fellow Humanists of Australia, and we'll let them do their introductions in a moment. But let me start off with the obvious. We are talking about a very controversial topic tonight. We all know this and accept this, but this is no reason not to talk about it. And in fact, it's the taboo that so often needs to be talked about these days, that in normal everyday life, these topics never make it to the depth that they deserve. That all said, I want to make clear, as humanists, we believe independent thought, so long as there is understanding, compassion, and engagement with reason with it. So any points that are made tonight are not necessarily the beliefs of Humanists Australia, but are ours to be questioned. Speaking of questions, we will be taking questions throughout this conversation. So please make sure to put them in and comment, and we'll attempt to make time for them when it's right. And for those not watching live, please add your comments in, like and subscribe. You know the deal. That goes for people watching live as well. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll get round to them. So with all that said and done, let me start with introductions, and we'll move into the conversation from there. Rod, take it away. Tell us about yourself and why you've stepped up to talk about masculinity today. And then when you're done, hand it over to David when you're ready.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for the opportunity. I've been thinking about masculinity for a long time. I belong to a men's support group that started about 15 years ago, and we've had a lot of topics, a lot of discussion about what it means to be a man today. And of course, over that 15 years, we've all grown a bit older too, so we're watching how masculinity changes as you move through different ages. And we reflect back on when we were younger. So, you know, obviously I'm not a young man now, but I have been, and I've had all the teenage angsts and all that stuff and remember them very clearly. But the other reason is I've got a couple of grandsons, and I'm fascinated, or I'm really keen that they make a good transition from boyhood to manhood. And so I'm doing reading and thinking about that. I'm keen to hear everybody's ideas.
Absolutely. And David, tell us about yourself and why you've stepped up today to talk about masculinity.
Yes, so I'm David. Hi, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Rod. Hi, I'm David, physicist and environmental scientist. Similar to Rod, I mean, my interest is through upbringing in that I regard parenthood as the most important job of all. So bringing up both your boys. So we have two children, boy and a girl, and our daughter, now grown, has 3 grandchildren. One of those are boys. So brought up one boy, and now we have a young grandson who we also want to inculcate in sound values.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, look, I've got 2 kids as well, and you know, the question of masculinity when it comes to, you know, raising them. I've got the pigeon pair, the boy girl. I absolutely devoted father. In fact, I got my ring here for dad. So it's very got my wife on one side, my life on the other. So but yeah, it's really, you know, when we talk about masculinity, and I've noticed this as I've been talking to a lot of people as we've been leading up to this event, it's the definitions of it. And I can see that Paul Lauren in there has, added in a nice question there, which is most conversations actually mix and match, feminine traits and masculine traits, etc., etc. And naturally, there are things that also they're just human traits. They're neither masculine, they're not feminine. They're just a human trait, and they can often get mixed up as well. When it comes to the definitions, have you thought about, David, what a definition might be, or Rod, if you want to jump in?
I could start, I suppose, in that I think definitions are difficult in that certainly it's in our best interest as humanists and even as good people for everyone in our society to be fulfilled and lead good lives. So that includes young men who we don't want them to be to end up disjoint from our society, not only for their own sake, because we want them to lead fulfilling lives, but social harmony will be affected if we end up with young men lost and disconnected and not leading those full lives. So certainly I think it's important for society to want our boys and then young men to become a part of the society and feel that they can join in. But so that often leads into, well, what is a good man? So a good man supposedly adheres to a code. He tries to stay physically strong, mentally aware, emotionally resilient, works hard, is not financially extravagant, to protect his family. And that's often the core of it, protecting the family, a protector, caring for those around him, particularly the ones he loves. So it's often focused on the immediate family. And that all sounds very good. I suppose the one slight bit of a strange thing is it. I mean, that's a good person, not necessarily just a good man. All those things are a bit gender-free. So
Absolutely.
Being a good man is in many ways being a good person. So I don't think it has to be specifically concentrated down just to the gender, but we do want to bring up our boys with those values, even if they're not specifically masculine, but they often are associated with masculine.
Yeah, and you raised a really good point there, because it's sort of like, well, okay, let's assume a situation where a man is, protecting their partner or their kids. Let's go with the kids. They're protecting their kids from someone that is out to cause harm to them. But if the mum did it as well, you wouldn't prescribe masculinity to that mum, would you? You would be referencing that as that's a good person. So I feel like there's a lot of vagary when it comes to this sort of side of things. And maybe it's the fact that, when we talk about masculinity, it's sort of like the societal mindset of what we think is masculine, which in a lot of ways I feel is starting to break down these days. We have different genders, we have different sexes, and I don't think we've often, we look at some females and, very feminine on the outside, but their behavior is very masculine. But we don't prescribe, oh, that's a man, for instance. So I'll get into that a little bit further. But Rod, have you got a definition that you think you can prescribe to this?
I think, I think you've already jumped a line there, Jason, when you say we wouldn't describe, or we might say the woman has masculine traits, because, that begs an assumption of what is masculine. And so that's the question we're grappling with, I think. And I agree with, all that was said before by David and yourself. A good man, if you like, which is masculinity, is a good person. But I think it also takes account of the differences and evolutionarily there are differences between men and women. Some things are societal and some things are genetic, and that's just the way it is. We face different problems. We handle ourselves a different way. Our brains develop differently at different speeds. And so masculinity is dealing with that and being a good person within that framework. and so, yeah, things like an innate desire to be a provider and a protector and that sort of stuff, I think that's hardwired. And yes, there's an element of that in both men and women, but I think it's really strong in men. And dealing with that is where they run into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to get some good questions or good thoughts coming in, which is like, really breaking down that, as we've got Matthew here, setting a bar for masculinity. And I think that's an interesting concept. This is something that I've sort of been discussing with the people that I've been talking to up until this point, which is really breaking it down into several different sections. And I may be, going out on a limb here, and people, you're more than welcome to disagree with me. This is just where I'm sort of coming at it. I'm a very pragmatic type of person as well. So I don't want to get too much into the philosophy of the underlying, components here. But the way I'm sort of starting to see society break things down is that we've got sort of three components which make up a general person in this spectrum. We've got the biological sex, which is like, you've got your XY, you've got your XX, but then you've got all these things in between. So you've got your XYY, you've got your XX with sperm, you've got, there's 100, other components. We've got to acknowledge them as well, because they are people and they just don't sit in that, classic barrier. So that's your biological sex. You then have your gender, which I do believe is a different thing, because when I walk into a place, and this is where I come from, the pragmatic side, I'm looking at it and I'm not going to go around and say, well, give me your DNA chart, let me have a feel of your belows. I'm gonna have a visual, and I'm gonna say, well, you look the part, so I'm gonna assume the part. And if you're different from that, then we can have a conversation where we're on a personal level at that point. But up until that point, I'm just gonna go on the assumptions of what we're looking. It's a visual concept. But then you could look the part of being a female, but you might act the part of being a man, which is a different spectrum again. So I feel like we're starting to hit this age or this stage in society where we are breaking these components into separate parts. And, traditionally speaking, and maybe in different societies for sure, a man is very much this, and these are how you get brought up. But in the Western society at the moment, we seem to be breaking those components out. Does that sort of make sense? And thoughts on that?
Well, similar to what Marianne said, I mean, the male and female spectrum tend to overlap. It's like
would we call that a human spectrum, though?
Yes, it's human spectrum, but there are. I mean, male and female do tend to have differences, and so they're like two nodes, but they overlap. Really, there's only one full difference, and that is if you have, say, heterosexual couple, the female will be having the children, will be delivering the children. I mean, the man can't carry a child, and even though it's very variable, I mean, age and infirmity will take even the strongest of us, but in a standard heterosexual couple, the male will tend to be physically stronger. So you have this slight divergence where perhaps there's a preference for the man to be doing things that require physical strength. But in general, nearly all tasks can be done by either of the couple in a standard pairing. I mean, changing a nappy mightn't be exciting, but it has to be done.
I can tell you what, because I used to be a plumber back in my past lives, I made a deal with my the mum of the kids. I was like, I'm not going to do the feeding. I'm just going to do the nappies. I'm so much happier. I was like in and out with 1 minute while she was there for 15 minutes trying to feed him. And I was just like, I'm done. I'll do the nappies. It's okay. But yeah.
So that,
I think you're right. There's a lot of overlap.
So that means that, and I think a bit of the disconnect that young men are facing is that they just need they're not used to being I suppose resolute. I mean, to me, masculinity has to do with resilience, being dependable. Once you've committed to something, following through. Those sort of, I mean, they're not specific to maleness, but to me, that is important in the masculine side, to have responsibility, to show that responsibility and not just well, leave if the times get tough. So yes, we do have young men facing problems, but in some cases, the young women of the same age are facing similar problems. Why is it the young men that are having these problems? Why are they feeling it more? When
you say feeling it more, are you referring to sort of gravitating towards the ideal of that masculine nature, or what are you sort of coming at?
Yes,
at that point? Sorry?
Checking out of society more, becoming more involved in say information rabbit holes and disconnecting from wider society. It seems to be more a young male problem, even though young women and young men seem to be facing similar levels of social hardship. I mean, life is a wonderful thing, but it can't be good all the time. Everyone's going to have hardship. You're going to have difficult times. I'm just wondering why the young women seem to be able to cope with that better than the young men.
Yeah, the evidence is there, isn't it, David? In the suicide rates and the incarceration rates and all of that young men are struggling. Not all of them, but
not all.
Far too many.
Yes. So I think we need to raise our boys without this expectation. I mean, part of it's society has changed, so and there are advantages to that. I mean, women have a lot more opportunities now than they did in the 50s and beforehand.
As they should.
As they should. Yeah. So we don't want to return to that. What we need is to be raising young boys that don't have this expectation that they will automatically be higher in some social hierarchy than the women in their lives, simply because they were born male.
Yeah,
we're all just humans. We've all got our roles to play in whatever life we end up in, and we just have to follow through, even if those tasks are like the housework. It might be that interesting, but it has to be done, and so it's better shared if you're in a couple. It's just again, it's a bit of a responsibility issue.
Well, one of the things I was sort of seeing come up multiple times as I've looked into this topic, throughout the years, is that the sort of like the ideal usefulness of the man these days has been somewhat removed, because females have effectively engaged or taken over so much of their responsibilities in lots of areas, or met the men at an equal sort of like sitting. And so, the man, used to be the breadwinner. They no longer are technically the breadwinner. They can be, not to say that they can't, but there's sort of like the traditional roles have sort of been removed from them. But then what is left for them to focus on? And additionally, and look, I want to make it clear. I think that there's also that bad rabbit hole, which is like, that I think Matthew's just said it there as well, where it's like, the expectations of a man is to, effectively feminize, where I would personally say that the expectation to a man to feminize is as toxic as letting a man be stoic, in the sense of if a man is being a stoic type of person, but that's how he manages his emotions, it sort of can be perceived by others as sort of like a toxic trait, because, he's not like releasing his emotions, he's not talking about it, yada, yada, yada. But that expectation of that person needing to do such a thing when it's not really their style to do it in that way, I believe can lead to toxic masculinity in many ways as well, just as much. And maybe that's not even like toxic masculinity at that point. Maybe it's, a depressive masculinity. Maybe it's something else, or a shameful masculinity, Whereas we should allow the men to, if you want to be stoic, sure, go ahead and be stoic, but make sure you're not being stoic because you think you need to be stoic. Make sure you're being stoic because that's what you gravitate towards, and you gravitate towards being open and talking and stuff like that. That's what you should be, be expected to, that's what you should be allowed to do, if that makes sense.
Yes. I think that's a good place to start, Jason, is be yourself and be allowed to be yourself. Absolutely.
Mm.
But I do think that bottling up emotions and thinking you're stoic it is a dangerous place to go. And I think that's where a lot of guys do get into trouble. And I think there's a sex or gender issue there, in that young men, first of all, their frontal lobe develops a lot later. So they're not as great at thinking consequences through and things like that. They tend to be risk takers. And look, that's part of being a male, and we need to accept that's how our boys will be. That's how we were. And it's not because we're dumb. It's just because we're males. But you need, if you don't learn how to share emotional baggage or depression, particularly stuff like that, and talk to other people about it, you are taking a huge risk. And I don't think I want my grandsons to take that risk. And so I will be trying to encourage them to open up and talk out. I might be saying, you're not a man if you don't, or you're not a man if you do. That's just normal. It's just good health. It's like saying, have a wash every now and then.
It needs to be done daily.
Clean your teeth. It's good for you.
Yeah. I think on that point, Rod, is, and this has affected me in the past as well, is because I'm a relatively non-emotional type of person, but I deal with my emotions in my own way. But the actual side is that because I don't speak emotionally, people don't perceive me as being emotional, and that's not the case. It's just the case that as I'm talking, it comes through. And I'm talking through the problem without being, upset or angry or etc. And the amount of times that I've been accused of being some logical, robot, I'm like, no, that's not the case. I'm a very emotional person. This is greeting sentient beings.
You need to find a form that understands you, or that works for you.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think I'll just come in and just
I'm angry. And look, there's a lot of different ways that forums can work, and it might be, in my case, it's a bunch of guys sitting around a table having dinner and talking for a couple of hours about how their month has gone since we last saw them, and what's been good, what's been bad, and what's worrying them. And there's a dozen guys there, and they open up to varying levels because that's who they are. And certainly, it's a practice thing. You learn it, you practice it. There's courses on active listening or empathetic listening, whatever you want to call it, that you can do. It's good stuff.
Now, David, you're big on raising kids, and you've got a lot to say about that, from my understanding. So give us sort of, I guess, some of the tidbits about what you're, what sort of gravitated to you, or how you've sort of like managed, growing your children in healthy ways. And I'll actually ask you, because you're a humanist, have you ever incorporated or considered incorporating humanism into that raising, or is that sort of been sort of a separate thought?
Well, I think being a humanist is part of being a good parent, in the sense of that, stressing that we're all part of the one human family. We're all interrelated, and you've got to consider everyone else's rights. You've got to treat people fairly, and not just be conscious of yourself. And it follows a bit on from what Rod and yourself were saying. I mean, there's elements of stoicism that are valuable. I mean, for getting through the difficulties of life. I mean, so but as Rod said, you can be overly stoic. You can bottle it all in and not engage, which isn't necessarily a great thing either. So certainly, yes, you want to be resolute and follow through and try and show your children those traits as well. But the other thing that
Yeah.
Rod also mentioned, which is very important, is that thinking about the consequences of your actions. I mean, young children are poor at it, and boys in particular. Boys are worse at it than girls, and carry that further through. In fact, when they've done studies in prisons, they found that lots of young men have never thought about the consequences of their actions. They've ended up in jail,
Really?
sometimes several times, and they are always reactive. They only live their lives reactively. In fact, when I had psychologists talk to them about it, it was a totally novel idea that they think about the consequence of their actions. It was always hit and be hit. It was always just react to what happened to me. And it was just this mind-blowing idea that, oh, we could consider what might happen if we do this thing. So talking about consequences of actions and how they impact on other people, I think that's a really big part of parenting, trying to get children used to thinking, oh yeah, if I do that, does that impact my parent? Does that impact my friends? And it takes them a long time to get used to that. I mean, plenty of adults still have difficulty with that. We all still struggle with trying to think through, will this just be me or affect everyone around me? But that act of consideration, I think, is a core aspect of parenting.
How do you suppose that we can increase the opportunities, I guess you'd say, for young kids to do such a task of reflecting? Is there particular actions that you've taken, or have you gone about trying to increase their the opportunities for them?
Quite often it's more just discussion. I mean, and talk to your children, talk to your grandchildren, especially if something has happened, like they've had a hard time, or they're a bit upset about something. That might be a good time to engage with, what went wrong, and how could it have turned out better, and you got hurt here. Well, did you think about what you were doing before you did that thing? And sometimes they're like, oh no. And it won't always stick straight away, particularly if they're young. But if you are discussing these things with them in a quiet time, at dinner time, when they wake up in the morning, just having these discussions about how do you be a good person? How do you fit in society, and how do your actions impact on other people? Getting back to that study on the young prisoners, they found that a single intervention study of a psychologist telling this group of young men about the advantages of thinking before they act. They might still act the same way, but just think before you do it. They found it more than halved recidivism. So those young men had half the rate of going back to jail than those who hadn't been just told that idea. Oh, think about your actions. Think about how they will impact on the person that is next to you.
When there's something so simple that can make such a difference, it's shocking to think that we are throwing people in jail and not giving them that little bit of information, life-changing information. But it's a shock to even, as you say, it's hard to believe that there's young guys in prison who've never had that thought. And
so I suppose it's fairly common, but it seems strange to me to think that. But but I suppose it's common.
Again, parenting is hard. Well, as you said, parenting's hard, and a lot of people don't do it well, or for a whole lot of reasons. Their own experience or their opportunity. Or they might be working 3 jobs and they're not there. So, and they just don't know themselves. If they've never been shown stuff, that it goes on generationally, and that's where, young guys often are they're learning from what they've seen, and who can blame them for that? That's all they've got. So it'd be nice to see some more interventions.
I read the Anxious Generation not too long ago because I wanted to see where the Australian laws were coming from on the social media ban.
Yeah.
One of the interesting factors in it that they talk about is obviously the depression rates are increasing, and there's additional suicides and this and that, and it seems to be he links it back to the breakthrough of devices, mobile phones and iPads and things like that. And one of the things that I sort of felt from the book when I was reading it is that the conversations that he's having are more about the lack of opportunity for these kids to actually engage on a human level. And that's because the parents these days, we're raised in a different scenario. So whereas back in the, many, many years ago, not to say that it was so much better in every regard, but the mum was at home, dad was at work, often working too many hours, to be fair, and mum wasn't allowed to work anyway, so that wasn't good either. There needs to be a healthy balance, absolutely. But the opportunity for the kids to actually engage with a parent was much, much higher. And additionally, the communities were much, much tighter. Now, I popped a lot of effort to meet my neighbours around here, and my kids were able to go across the road and et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like I'm a unique case. I talk to some of my neighbours; they don't even know who the neighbours are around here, and that's not on them. That's a cultural thing, Yeah. Whereas back in the past, the kid would walk 2 doors down and it'd be mum and pup's house, or it'd be, Uncle Jack's house, or additionally, if the family was poor enough, they just lived in the same house. And so therefore you had mum and pup in the same spot, assisting with raising the kids. And I think that we're probably overlooking a lot of that, and the virtues and the values that those instances can offer, because like we hear stories of how grandpa, and I'm sure this would hit you home, Rod, because you talked about your grandkids earlier. But we hear stories of the grandparents instilling those values through the generations. But now that load is now put onto the parents themselves, and they're already working 40 hours a week. Mum and pup live 40 minutes away, so they can't come round on a dime of a hat. And then all of a sudden, what's the best solution? Well, I'll stick them in front of an iPad and I'll just get the dishes done. I don't blame parents for where they're at. But I think we can look at this and say we need to find a better way. There needs to be a bit of a community, and honestly, that's part of the reason why I joined Humanists Australia, because of that community aspect. So, but what's your thoughts on that, Rod? Have you been able to instill any values onto your grandkids? Are you even allowed? That's a big question for a lot of grandparents these days. So.
Yeah, I'm certainly allowed, but as you just said, you almost nailed it. I live 40 minutes away from them. So I can't be there at the drop of a hat. I do spend time with them, and I spend probably about the same amount of time on the phone supporting my kids as they bring up their kids. I feel really, well, a couple of things. I look back to my own experience, and I was one of those dads who spent too much time at work and didn't put the input in that I would have liked to put in. My wife was working too, but she organised her time so that she was there, and she had a lot of help from her mother, so and my mother. So there was grandparenting input, and they lived 5 minutes away, so that was different. We were lucky in that regard. But I've got 2 sons-in-law now who I see putting in a lot of time with their kids, and that's fantastic. I guess they're lucky that the type of job they've got, they can sort of move their hours around a bit, and sometimes be there for school pickup or whatever, and that's fantastic. I think a lot of young people are doing a great job, and at the same time, they're the generation who are breaking down the rigid ideas we had of femininity, or how women behave and how men behave in a relationship or in a parenting, and that's great to see too. So it's not simple. It's not necessarily getting better or getting worse. It's certainly different.
I have a fantastic take on the housing crisis at the moment, but I won't go into it this conversation. There'll be another one for another day, okay?
Yeah, let's go
But I
back to
do want to
the
bring it.
grandparents.
I want to bring it back because I'm seeing a lot of comments about living up to the expectations coming through. And it's an interesting point because you raised it earlier, Rod. Now, funnily enough, I've got a whole bunch of books behind me. A lot of these are deemed, toxic masculinity books. We've got No More Mr. Nice Guy over there. We've got 48 Laws of Power. We've got The Game. I've read a lot of these books, and the concepts in them, I wouldn't say are anything to do with toxic masculinity, but what tends to happen is the confusion between this is a nice idea to input into my life compared to, oh, I have to do all the 48 laws of power, otherwise I won't be a powerful man. And Rod, you recently watched a documentary you mentioned that changed your mind on the alpha male. So let's talk about expectations and sort of how do we alleviate young kids from having to feel like they need to live up to the expectations, or how do we be better role models ourselves that our kids want to live up to those expectations?
Wow, that's a hard. Like the second part of what you're saying.
All right, hit the first one then. That's all right.
yeah. How do we alleviate them from feeling they need to meet those expectations? I think, again, it's part of humanism to encourage people to be the best they can, but to be themselves. I not to have those expectations, I guess. I probably have lived in a sheltered bubble a lot of my life in terms of expecting certain behaviours from good guys. And seeing a lot of that alpha male behaviour as undesirable. I was never sporty at school. I was one of the nerdy kids. I don't have much interest in football, which makes me weird in Melbourne. But not as weird as I thought. There's actually quite a few others, which is nice to know. But I realise, one of the things that came out of that doco, it wasn't a new idea, but it certainly emphasised to me that I have no right to look at people who behave much more alpha type, and let's say no, I won't name a team, but let's say a football supporter who I might have thought was naturally a bit rough and that was the edge of toxic masculinity, let's say. I don't think it is anymore. It's just masculinity. It's only toxic when it turns into behaviour that's hurting other people, and that's not an assumption one should make.
Yeah.
So that's just me going through a learning curve, Jason. It's not a great wisdom of anything. It's just my description of things that are going through my head.
And that was the BBC documentary by that British actor.
Yes.
Do you remember his name? Dwyer, was it?
No, but I've got it close by somewhere. Danny. Yeah, it's all right.
But I think it comes back to that sort of like, that's very much a perceived toxic masculinity, I'd say, in that situation, isn't it, Rod?
Yeah.
Where the trait isn't necessarily creating that toxic environment, but it's perceived to be toxic because, but that's like a third person toxic masculinity. It's not really toxic, and it may not even be masculinity in itself as well. And I think that's, I come back to a lot of like, I feel like a lot of men are gravitating to this content, not because it's good for them, but it makes them feel good in a lot of ways. It makes them feel validated. It makes them feel like I found my place. Much like, people gravitate to religions because they feel accepted. People
Everyone
gravitate
wants
to
that.
flat earth communities. They're feeling accepted. Oh, these things which I'm doing naturally are now embraced. And so, I stress not to attack, I feel, these scenarios. And I'll give it an interesting, scenario, which I've sort of like come up with this idea of breaking down toxic masculinity into a few different subcategories. One of them is that perceived toxic masculinity that you just mentioned, Rod. But here's another one: things that generally a male can do, and I specifically refer to the male and the gender form in that sense. Male can do that benefit themselves. I believe that would be more of a toxic situation. Versus that same masculine behavior that can be benefit for their people. And I say that as a community side of things. And a situation in that, this comes up to be would be, a male is generally more imposing, as we've already discussed, in the physical sense, that if a male is, hovering over a girl and corners him into the side of the wall or something like that, in the attempt to effectively persuade him to, go home with him or hook up with him or something like that, then that, I would say, is a selfish reason and therefore toxic. But that same behavior can be used on a positive sense, as it's happened to my partner many times, and we've got a lot of big friends, where a particular male is, trying to, get onto her effectively. And so she goes and stands near our bigger friends and, says, this guy's being a bit greasy. And they sort of use their same imposing, force for the protection of their people. And so I think that that's a healthy mindset of masculinity. And I think that we can sort of put that in the category of a masculine trait, because that's a bit more difficult that's not so common in the female realm, if that makes sense.
Yes, so as I said earlier, we do have that bit of a difference in that, yes, there are strong women, but the strongest members of our society are typically going to be men. So even though those groups overlap, we will have those larger men. So yeah, it's a positive if they can have that input. But in general, I'm not that keen on defined gender roles. All right, it will come up every now and then where the male and female difference will lead to a different outcome. But in general, most of the tasks we are going to undertake in life aren't going to be that different whether you're male or female. So in the parenting realm, I've worked from home for decades. So when our kids were in school, I ended up with a house full of kids, because our kids could come home. I was here, and all the other teenagers would come with them, because there's a house we can go to, and so that was good. I mean, I appreciated being part of their lives, even past the age where children would normally start to separate a bit from their parents and be more involved with their peer group. And I had the advantage of knowing where they were of an afternoon.
I'm going to be the same, David. I'm going to be the same. In encouraging the kids to engage. And look, not to say that the kids' parents that I've met, they're fantastic people, and I hope that they'll be able to do the same. And it's really, I think we've got to get back to that stage of building up that community in that sense of raising. And just having a bit of many role models. I think a combination of maybe role models. Maybe that's what we're lacking, is potentially that we're lacking the amount of the diversity of role models, maybe.
And it is a bit of opportunity. I mean, I had that opportunity. Not everyone else has. Our society, though it has many advantages, and we do seem to be improving in a humanist sense in terms of inclusion and more rights for everyone. But we are a bit more of a dissociated society than we used to. There's less of that extended family. There's less of that village where everyone knows everyone. So we are a bit more individualistic, a bit more our own silo in our house. And it would be nicer if we did have a bit more community, a bit more neighbourhood links, a bit more sharing of all things, including looking out for children. But
I just want to point out Purple Rhymes, the toxic part comes when the man goes from being protective to acting possessive. See, I'd put that in a human trait. I'd say that that's not a toxic masculinity trait. That's not a toxic femininity trait. That's just a human trait. That's toxic in general. So And I think that that's the key thing, is that I think it's actually quite hard to actually nail down particular masculine traits, because it's got to be specifically a male has to be able to do them, or generally, I put it in the realm of like 90% of the time it's a male, thing to do. Even the protective role, we started off with that. Someone mentioned that you would expect both. You would not expect a mum to just walk past a kid being attacked by a dog. You'd expect the mum, that would be the expectation. So I think that's
Absolutely.
once again another human trait.
Yes, it's more that as we keep on saying, all those traits overlap to a certain extent. We just they just separate a bit in terms of their likelihood of being male or a female aspect.
I think they're more, that sort of stuff is more likely to get out of control in a male. And something else that I got out of that doco, actually, and it was Danny Dyer, How to Be a Man, was that, just generally men are stronger than women. It's not always the case, but generally it is. So if it comes, if whether it's possessiveness or control or whatever you want to call it, if it comes to push and shove, it's most likely going to be the woman who misses out, who gets hurt, physically hurt, and the guy is going to end up, in serious trouble as he needs to. But
and that's
I don't think it's a pointer to the fact that being a male is the problem. It's more a case of when things get ugly, being bigger and stronger is a problem.
And that's why we need to raise our boys and young men with that about thinking about the consequences of their actions. They've got to think about other people,
including the fact that they are bigger and stronger if they are.
Yes, yes, and their future partner and their partners, they've got, that's the most important part of their life, really. So, so we want to prepare them early for that expectation. They can't just assume that they can be rough with their female friends. As I said before, they can't just assume that they are going to be higher in the social hierarchy just because of their physical strength. That doesn't mean they go below. It doesn't mean they should be lower in the hierarchy either. It's just we're all humans, and we all
got Paul Loring there. Paul, have you got a specific action? I'd say a specific masculine action that you believe is defined as a masculine action that we can discuss. Because from my perspective, we are kind of sitting on the fence, because the fence is quite large, it seems. There's limited numbers of actual things that specifically defined as masculine or specifically defined as feminine. There's definitely things out there, but I don't think there is as vast. Although this will lead me to one of my other sort of subcategories. So while you're doing that, Paul, and I'm looking forward to your answer. I think another idea of toxic masculinity is the idea that a man should do something because that's the sort of the society expectation of him, which I think falls into like, I should be a protector. That's like, you don't like, you should be a protector. I think that you should protect your family, but you don't have to protect them in necessarily the physical sense. You can protect them in many areas. And I'll come back to the community again, because if you have a good community, then you're going to have those physical protectors. If we take it back to the tribal days, you're going to have men that are protecting in sort of like, the ability to gather stuff and build up, protection from the weathers or other things. You're going to have men that are going to go out and protect them from other tribes. I always like to bring it back to the tribal days, but to expect each, male to try and live up to every other male's expectation of what we're trying to do there, I think that's a big ask. But how can they achieve a certain action, such as protection, or such as, finding a mate or something like that? It doesn't have to be the same. And so it's that idea that, I have to be this way. I have to dress in all black, or I have to dress with my, with a top hat all the time. although that was pretty cool back in the day, to be fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sort of like that idea that I have to be this way, which
I have
then
to have
I believe
muscles.
leads into the shame. Yeah, which then leads into the shame. And I think that we should look at like shameful masculinity. Like not much to say that you should be ashamed for doing that, but you're feeling shame because of it.
Yeah.
So,
well, one thing, I'll just say one. I'll just put in my plug for something we'll talk about another day, which is universal basic income. Universal basic income would free up people to live more authentic lives. But go on, Rod.
Yeah, to be themselves and choose their own role or negotiate their own role in the family.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to come back to the necessity of guys having somewhere they can talk. I think one of the other differences we see, and this is not, I think this is back to evolution again. Women seem to be much better at gathering together friends that they can talk to and share their stresses and support one another. Guys have been, because there's this stoic image idea, find it much harder to do that. And maybe there's a genetic aspect to that, an evolutionary aspect to that. Maybe it didn't work for guys to do that. If you're going to ask someone to go out and kill the next tribe, well, you don't want them thinking too much about it. You want them just charging out and doing it. So we're hardwired perhaps not to be great at getting together and talking. But I can tell you the feedback, both from myself and from the other guys in my group, how valuable that is in releasing stresses and anger and shame and all of that, to do that with a bunch of guys who you trust, rather than go home and bottle it up and then maybe blow one day and take it out on your family or someone else, or yourself. I'll put in a plug for a thing called the Men's Table, which is growing gangbusters in Australia at the moment. My little group was self-seeded and just has lasted for 15 years, but we've just joined the Men's Table, which is a very similar idea. A bunch of guys who decided that going to a business breakfast was, interesting, but it wasn't doing anything for their real lives, and they would meet over a meal and try to learn to be really authentic with one another. That was 15 years ago. After they got it going, they said, let's do more of this, and start another group. And there's now 260 groups across the country, 260 tables of about a dozen men who meet and have dinner once a month and talk about, authentically talk about what's going on in their lives. It's fantastic. We need more of it.
Yeah. No.
I'm sure that humanist groups will do some of that too. I mean,
I think that's an initiative I'm sure we would look into one day. Although not my decision to make. Mary, if you're listening. But look, we are coming up to the tail end of this. People, if you have any more questions, make sure you start getting them in now, because we'll start answering them. I'll be more focused on the comments now, and we'll be butting in and answering any unsolved riddles that have been thrown out today, which I'm sure there is. Paul Loring said sexuality use in the workplace. And he's also previously said every characteristic so far assigned to male has a corresponding characteristic of femininity. If males are expected to be strong, is that what females expect, and hence their behaviors? I'm not fully grasping the question there. Are you saying that females should expect it, or are you saying that currently they're expecting it? And just on your second one there, Paul, sexuality use in the workplace, well, I can tell you that goes both ways. It's more common with men, but I think that's just because men are more accepting of advances as well. So from the female side, if we can look at a specific characteristic, I'll go back to that, Paul. Lauren, is that you can look at a specific characteristic. I'll say for work. Sorry, Mary. If we can go back to a specific characteristic, then we can, that's male specific or masculine specific, then yeah, happy to look at that. But it seems to be a very wide fence to sit on. It's taken 15 years. Is there any final thoughts that you want to get out on the table, David or Rod, at the moment? We've got 6 minutes left.
Okay, I suppose my one final thing is that, I mean, this has long been a problem. For societies have coped with young men not being adequate parts of the society and therefore being restless. And we've had war. There's been wars that are worse because of societies that are restless. So it's not a new thing. Probably the main thing that is different in the current environment is social media. We have the exaggeration of social media now, where there's a lot of this creating extra angst, and with the internet, if you're a young person, you make a mistake, it's not forgotten. It's on the internet forever after. So I think that that exaggerates problems. I don't think it creates definitely new problems. That I think these problems of dissociation from society have always been there, but I think they are exaggerated a bit with social media. I think young boys and young girls both have problems with social media. Whether it's worse for young men, it's hard to know, but I think it's certainly an issue. But I don't think it's new. Like if you look at studies from the 1920s, 1930s, they also had high suicide rates of young men. They also had a lot of dissociation where men were having these similar problems to today, of feeling they didn't have a role in society. So I think it's always been there. Hopefully we will get better at actually dealing with it. But hopefully humanism will be part of that role of trying to understand how to re-engage with people who have disengaged from other people and society in general, and we can help bring them back to the fold, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Rod, any last thoughts that you have?
I've had a good say, but I'm just seeing something's just popped up from Stephanie saying, what do you think is the right course of action if someone shows signs of this, the negative side of it? And I presume she's talking about what we'll call toxic masculinity, getting either very withdrawn or very pushy and violent, or potentially violent. And I would say the first step is get them talking to someone if you can, and if you can't, get someone who can make them talk to listen, which might, if need be, it can be a policeman at the extreme end of it. But yeah, have a look at the men's table. A lot of the guys who go to the men's table or our group are there because a woman in their life said, you need to go and talk to someone. Go and try these guys.
Truebrook just said, I think Australian men are less toxic than American men. I've actually heard that that's probably true. I think actually the toxicity concept over here is actually significantly less, and maybe that's why we are struggling to talk about it to the extent that you'd be happy with, Paul. Although I somehow feel like you're agreeing with us. I'm really struggling to. We are all control freaks. Just we all use different means. So for every supposed toxic male behavior, there are equally toxic behaviors of female. I feel like we're saying the same thing. Subtle physical strength versus subtle manipulative manipulation, I'm assuming you're saying. Yeah, there are definitely contrasting components like that. As to Stephanie Collins's question, what would you do? What's the right course of action if someone shows signs of this? I think bringing it to their awareness. I think, having that conversation. Personally, I say I've had some friends that have been a bit toxic, and I've had a sit down. I've said, mate, we've got to have a quick chat. I brought it to their awareness, and I can tell you what, most guys just don't know it. Most girls don't know. Most people don't know that they're doing something wrong because they haven't been told. And what happens too often is that their friends leave them. They're like, sure, I'm not going to touch that. And they leave them. And in that scenario, they never learn. They continue going on. They go, well, that person's, not a nice person. I'll save the language. But the fact is that we got to, be that reflective person to our friends. And I'll bring it back to the community because I think it's so important. If we want to build a community, we've got to be willing to have those tougher conversations. I'll leave it with this. This is my message to guys to think, particularly dads. I would say dads more than guys, because of it's such an easy concept to think about. Is that the person you want to be is the guy you want your son to grow up into, and the guy that you want your daughter to bring home. And if you can think of being that one person, then I think you're on the right track. Anyway, that's 8:30. That's all we've got to say. I know we've opened up many cans of worms, and thank you so much for such an active chat, everyone. We've had a lot of fun. Until next time, hopefully, I felt like this ran pretty smoothly, but I don't know, maybe I haven't been doing the right job or anything like that. But no, it's been a fantastic chat, David and Rod. So thank you for joining, and thank you for my first live stream, everyone.
Thanks, Jason.
We'll catch you all later.
Thanks, Jason.
Clear your head, use your eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.